The North American P-51 Mustang. Her very name rekindles passions in those who flew her or were protectively cradled by her, all the way to Berlin and back. A Mustang. Perhaps the finest propeller-driven fighter craft to ever grace the skies. Most distinctive and recognizable sound. But to the beginning. September 1st, 1935, 0445 hours. Poland fell in 18 days under the force of the two major military advancements since World War I, the airplane and the armored vehicle. England watched, and Winston Churchill comments. Now at last, the slowly gathered, long pent-up fury of the storm broke upon us. Within 3 weeks, the long-famed French army was to collapse in rout and ruin. Within 6 weeks, we were to fend for ourselves alone, almost disarmed, with triumphant Germany and Italy at our throats, with the whole of Europe open to Hitler's power. Knowing her own industry could not meet the equipment expansion required by an impending war, as early as 1938, the British Air Ministry visited aircraft companies in the United States to find a suitable fighter and have it manufactured for export to Britain. They chose the Curtiss P-40. And in ordering 200 advanced trainers from North American Aviation, they also asked Dutch Kindleberger if North American would produce the P-40 under license from Curtiss. Kindleberger rejected their request and suggested instead that North American produce a new fighter of their own design. 48 hours later, Kindleberger produced preliminary designs for this fighter, and on the 29th of May, 1940, he signed a contract with the British for 320 NA-73s at a cost of $47,000 each. The contract stated that the NA-73 must be ready for flight testing within 8 months. An internal memo set the time to be the same as if they were to tool up to produce the P-40. That time was 120 days. The chief designer was Edgar Schmude, a Bavarian-born engineer who migrated to the United States in 1930, being a part of the original Willy Messerschmitt design group. The design team for the NA-73 was headed by Raymond Rice. Fuselage was ready for the engine within 120 days. But North American could not obtain the Allison V1710 engine. This 1,150 horsepower engine was being installed in the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the Curtiss P-40, and the Bell 39 Air Cobra. U.S. Army Air Corps had committed to supply the power plant, but on an as-available basis. Finally, on the 7th of October, the Allison engine was delivered and installed in one day. The 26th of October, 1940. Almost 5 months to the day from the time the rough sketches were submitted to the British that the first NA-73X rolled out onto the runway at Mines Field, California. She would be known to the British as the Mustang 1. In Europe, the Battle of France was over. Adolf Hitler could now turn his attention across the English Channel. The Battle of Britain was to begin. Nazi stormtroopers gathered along the English Channel in preparation of the pending invasion. It was almost a festive atmosphere. Little did they know that they would never cross that narrow strait. Defiant British Lion would prove too much for the Axis.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender.
The Luftwaffe sent her best: Junker Ju-88s, the Heinkel 111s, Me-110s, the Dornier Do-17, and the Junker 87 dive bomber. Swarms of Me-109s came to ward off the British Supermarine Spitfire 1A and Hawker Hurricane 1s. Superb aircraft, and truly a match for the German escort fighters. The test work on the NA-7B continued. Flight characteristics were excellent. The British were so impressed with the 25-mile-per-hour increase in airspeed over the Curtiss P-40 and the ease of handling that they placed an order for 300 more. Production work on the British orders was in full force. This was at the height of the Battle of Britain. The British pilot in the Hurricanes and Spitfires were deadly against the German invaders. They had a 3-to-1 and as much as a 4-to-1 kill ratio during those last heroic months of 1940. Sunday night, December 19th, 1940, a massive incendiary raid was carried out against the city of London. British would sustain this blow anymore. They would not break. .20-millimeter cannons were to be put into the new British order of NA-83s, now called P-51NA by the U.S. government. Testing was thorough before the cannons were mounted onto the airframe. Delivery of the Mustang I began in the spring of 1941. The Air Corps took little notice of this new fighter as they were not yet at war. P-51 Mustang, officially a U.S. fighter, was now leased to the British under the Lend-Lease program, retaining America's neutrality. The Air Corps took delivery of 2 XP-51s for evaluation. December 7th, 1941. America is now at war.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Now, the Air Corps had a need for this fighter. The Mustang was underpowered with the Allison engine, and her best performance was under 10,000 feet. The A-36A dive bomber was created. Her first service was in North Africa. Both the British and the Americans found her maneuverability and speed useful in low-level ground support and as an attack aircraft. Along with the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, the A-36 Invader pounded ground targets in both Europe and Asia. Meanwhile, the B-17 Flying Fortress was penetrating the Luftwaffe-defended European continent deeper and deeper. The limited range of the high-altitude fighters could only accompany the bomber groups for 150 miles from their air bases with battle time and reserve fuel. This left the B-17s totally vulnerable to German fighters for a considerable part of the trip. Losses were very high. Many didn't make it. Others were luckier. A long-range, high-altitude fighter was desperately needed. In the summer of 1942, a Rolls-Royce Merlin 1650-3 was married to a P-51 airframe. This was the birth of the P-51B, the new form of Mustang that was to change the air war over Europe. The 30th of November, 1942, saw the first flight test of this proven airframe with the power of the Merlin engine. With her multi-stage blower on the 1,380 horsepower inline power plant, the P-51 Mustang could now stay with any fighter at any altitude, all the way to 26,000 feet. With the addition of drop tanks holding a total of 108 additional gallons, the P-51B could now accompany the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Visibility was now a major concern to the pilots. The greenhouse gave way to the Malcolm hood, which was an improvement, but not until the bubble canopy was developed did the Mustang enjoy unrestricted visibility both front and rear. The new Mustang became the P-51D. P-51 with the teardrop canopy, an advanced Rolls Merlin, the V-1650-7, and 6 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings went into production in February of 1944. Before the end of production, nearly 8,000 would be produced in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas. The legend of the P-51 Mustang was about to be built. She was to fulfill her mission.
Berlin. On this day, a railway bridge and road junction southwest of Berlin are bombed as part of the synchronized blows against Nazi transportation. Berlin itself had for days been under constant attack, with night-flying British mosquitoes following 8th Air Force heavies in round-the-clock battering of the Nazi capital. Target, Lüneburg, in the heavily industrialized Elbe River area. Lüneburg has extensive facilities for locomotive and freight car repair. Workshops, marshalling yards, and warehouses were wrecked. 3 bridges in the area received at least 1 direct hit each. Target, a rail choke point at Ludwig-Lust. The bomb run was made perpendicular to the target. Direct hits ripped up rails, destroyed equipment, and a choke point was smashed. Target, Ilsen. One of the heaviest of the raids was against the industrial town and ordnance center at Ilsen, north of Brunswick. At least 325 bursts could be seen on the rail lines and on installations in the marshalling yards, causing extreme damage throughout the southern half of the area. At raid's end, at least 4 intense fires could be seen. Allied bombs were crippling fascist Germany, methodically and thoroughly, as advancing Allied armies narrowed the Nazi sphere in Europe. The 6,600 tons of bombs dropped during this day's offensive against Nazi rail targets were only a fraction of what would follow, as the air forces continued to paralyze the enemy's ability to move in a violent prelude to paralyzing his will and his ability to fight.
Charlie. Red leader of the group, close it up, tight. Drum tanks, let's go. Then it's 2 o'clock road. I'm in behind you. Go ahead.
Of all the fighting men who admired the P-51, perhaps the B-17 crews loved her the most. Mustang fame was not limited to ground support and bomber escort. She was one of the quickest, most maneuverable ships to fly. The 51 was known for her ability to destroy the German jet, the Me-262. As long as she could pounce from a high advantage, the 262 would fall to the Mustang's tighter turns and quicker acceleration. The P-51D Mustang performed with distinction in the Far East, where a 51 pilot received the Congressional Medal of Honor for downing 7 Japanese aircraft in one battle. She escorted the B-29 Superforts from Iwo Jima to the Japanese mainland and returned with 21 kills. An all-purpose fighter built around the P-51 concept, the P-82 was developed at the end of the war. She saw limited service in Korea, along with the venerable P-51D. Unlike most Warbirds, the Mustang is not just a museum piece or an oddity at air shows. There are some 200 still flying in civilian service. A great and fierce fighter craft with a justly earned niche in aviation history. And as many a stunned admirer will tell you, she still leaves a path of awesome sound and fury across a quiet sky.